It was some 2 months ago when I was attending an event in Columbia, South Carolina, at a local church that I encountered a new friend of mine, Dr. Don DeCostin, president of Charleston Southern University. And there was somebody he had told me in our interview that I really should consider interviewing. Well, it was at this event when I had the privilege standing in line to get food, the barbecued ribs that had been prepared for that meal, when I was first introduced to Ron Harvell. And happened to get our food. We sat down at the same table, and it was like the CSU, leadership table. And I was invited to sit down, and Ron and I had a chance to talk about life and ministry. And it was because of that I'm able to have this time to come and sit actually on the campus of CSU in their recording studio to have this conversation with him. And so, Ron, I'm going to call you Ron because, we're a couple old goats, and I appreciate your willingness to do this, having met with me once so we can talk and explore this. So this is for, the people who share our ministry journey online to watch this. Most of them are connected with churches, and because our ministry is one of coming alongside struggling churches to sort of reboot or find new traction, a new sense of direction, that it was in my conversation with Dr. Costin looking at the ministry of chaplaincy and its relationship to the local church that really has inspired me to want to explore that further with you because of who you are and where you've been. And so I want to begin by you just telling me, a little bit about your personal story. I know we're both from Texas, and so that was a commonality that helped our relationship. So tell me about, really where you grew up in your early life and your journey to faith.
Right. My mom and dad met each other at Hardin-Simmons University, where my grandfather had also gone, and it's where I met my wife. And so Abilene, Texas area, part of the Holy Land, is in our journey. And but one of the interesting things for me, I was born in Sweetwater, Texas, but Mom and Dad were stationed. Daddy was stationed in California at the time in the Army, and so he was an infantry officer, and then a fixed wing pilot over the East-West German border in out of Fulda, Germany, and then he went into helicopters and flew in Vietnam. Had 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot, and subsequently retired in Colorado Springs, Colorado, as a colonel. So I grew up as a military brat.
Okay.
And so we were on the journey all the time, and going places and moving quite a bit. And so having that experience of being military, growing up, being on the go, we went to lots of neat churches. We went a lot of places. Was baptized in Mineral Wells, Texas, and as a young kid, as a 10-year-old, had come to faith there. It was a marvelous experience with the Lord coming into becoming a Christian. It was you want me to elaborate on that?
Well, because everybody's journey is not exactly the same. So as for those of us who came to faith as children, some it happened in a regular Sunday service, some it happened in Sunday school, some it happened in vacation Bible school, some it happened in camp. So for you,
because you were 6 when you became
I was 6, yes.
Yeah, Donnie was 8, I was 10, and I went forward as a kindergartner to our first grader, one or the other, to be saved. I wanted to become a Christian. Went back to the counselor, was very wise, and said, "What are you wanting to do?" And the Lord just did not give me a word I could even say. And they said, "Why don't we wait for God's timing in this?" And my mom had told me that you're going to get this call from God, and He may only call you one time in your life, and when He calls, you had better be ready, and you'll know it. And I said, "Well, what is it?" And she was trying to explain what burden was, what conviction was, and things, but it didn't want to translate well to me at all as a 10th grader, as a 10-year-old. And so I said, "What is it?" And she said, "It's kind of like a pain in your heart." Well, I'm a kid. I know what pain is, so I'm waiting for this pain in my heart. So I would know that Jesus was calling me, and I was ready because I knew that He died for me and He rose against the grave. And I didn't want to go to hell, and I wanted to spend time in my life with Him, and I wanted to know. So I knew the plan of salvation extremely well. Sure enough, at our house at Fort Walters Army aviation place right outside of Mineral Wells, I was walking from our little carport to the house, and this sharp pain in my heart happened. And I fell on my knees, and I asked Jesus to come into my heart. And I said, "You forgive me my sins, be my Lord and Savior, come into my life." instantly the Holy Spirit's presence was there. It was just so exciting to be a Christian, something I really definitely didn't want to miss ever being in the midst of the confusion. 2 days later, that same sharp pain happened again. I fell on my knees. I asked Jesus to come back into my heart immediately, and never again in my life was there ever that pain. So the Lord spoke to me at my ability to understand so that I could know him, and then to help me understand that that was not a normal thing in people's lives. It was to have the sharp pain, and that wasn't part of salvation or needing to have it again. But I never had it again in my life. It was just designed by God for that moment. It was really sweet to have that sense of always with the Lord, and then know that I've never, from that moment on, never wondered that I wasn't a Christian. That's been my life.
Either in that moment or in retrospect, a few years removed.
Sure.
How important was the life that your parents were living out their faith?
Yeah, that's great.
In respect to that.
Right. My mom, she grew up. Her dad was a deacon, was in the town that they were from, and she always talked things of faith all the time. Was a person of great faith, and so we were definitely at least Sunday morning people. We were Sunday morning, and usually training union and things on Sunday nights as well, which was very helpful. Dad was attended and went probably 3 out of 4 times a month, but things would happen when he was home. He was gone all the time. He was deployed. He had 3 remote assignments while we were growing up for a full year each of those, and he had was gone on a lot of Army adventures and stuff like that. So sometimes he would stay home on Sundays when he was home, and but most of the time he went and grew up in that faith. And then when I felt called to ministry as a high school kid, and so I was growing in the Lord, heard about a thing called quiet times and how to have prayers and the basic senses of great general discipleship, which wasn't formal at our church. A lot of good Sunday school, great church in Colorado Springs, but I began to read Christian books and books about missionaries, things like that. Really thought, I've got one life to live for the Lord. I might as well serve the Lord God. So what do you want me to do? So between my junior and senior year of high school, really set this really crystal clear call to be a foreign missionary. And so this was the highest calling. This is what we're supposed to do. So be in the ministry and do that. And Dad said, hey, I want you to meet with the pastor. I want you to talk with him. This is such a serious thing. I want you to get his advice from the pastor. And the pastor met with me. We talked about that calling, and all my desires to do everything else. Kids growing up wanted to really became centralized on becoming a missionary. And so went to Hardin Simmons, took the missions tracks, church planning things, was a Bible major and there at HSU, and really had a great experience with local congregations there, working with them and learning how to be a preacher and all the great things. A wonderful experience there in applied church ministry, as well as getting to grow and learn at the university. So it was a good experience, and I only dated girls who wanted to be foreign missionaries. So at Hardin Simmons,
good idea.
So there's a lot of them at Hardin Simmons, and so when there met Marcia, who would become my wife, and she was a student. We have a funny story we tell about her, because she was the only graduate of 300 people at Hardin Simmons University with a 4.0. So in the only entire school, there's only one person with a 4.0, and it was her. She never had a B, neither did I. And so I had straight C's or D's. Anyway, so
has your story been that it shows how smart she was? She chose to marry me.
Yes, no, it's God made her marry me. Is how I was. Okay. Yeah. So it'll average these out. There's a joke I tell that about lightning striking the different things. But anyway, so God brought her into that in our relationship. She taught school in a town called Kermit, Texas, out in very west Texas.
Some of us from Texas know where Kermit is.
And so she taught school there. I went to Southwestern to start seminary. A year later, we were married, and all on the missions track. And about halfway through seminary, God just started convicting us about the military being our people group, and didn't really. I said, Dad, I didn't like chaplains that much. I wasn't that fond of them. I really hadn't had that many great experiences with them. Had good with some, but really didn't want to be a chaplain. Considered it kind of far different than a call to be a foreign missionary. And the Lord just threw a series of miracles in a particular, we prayed for 6 months. God, do you really want us to do this? And the pastor of the church, we were on staff at a church, and he just said, I really think God's called you guys to do this too. And the director of chaplaincy at Southwestern, we met with him, and the director of missions, and they all kind of the same kind of coalition to say, this, God's called you to do this. And then the Lord just put a bunch of things together in like 1 week that really said, this is what I want you to do, and things that just came out of the blue. They weren't, I mean, just really great validators of the call. This is what I want you to do. So, okay, God, we said when I went forward to surrender to ministry, I went forward to surrender to ministry as foreign missions. But when I got to the front, the Lord said, I want you to say special service, whatever I call you to do. Right. And that was between my junior and senior year. So then, at Colorado Springs. But then we went to seminary, and God turned our direction to this chaplaincy program, and there was no way to get in because there was no space to get in. You had to be a chaplain candidate to be a reserve chaplain to get an active duty because the wall was coming down, and the Air Force was getting cut into a third of its size, and we went from 60 chaplains a year to 25 being assessed, and so we had a backlog of years of that 60 development wall, and so they said if you can't become a chaplain, if you can't get in, if you don't get a slot as a candidate, you can't become active duty. You can't get reserves to become active duty. So we prayed about it, and Southern Baptist brought in 14 the year before, and the next year it was 0, then 1, then 0. Wow. So it was a huge list, and but unfortunately I was 25 years old and graduated from seminary, and we're in Kermit, Texas, pastoring a church. After we got a slot to be a candidate, and God opened the door. There was 4 priests that slots couldn't fill. They gave them to the Southern Baptist, and several of us at Southwestern got those slots, and we got to go do a reserve program. I got to go at a place called Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, and then go to the academy. And then when that finished, graduated seminary, finished the academy tour, went to start pastoring a little bitty church called Northside Baptist Church in Kermit, Texas. So the place, when we left, we were taking Marcia's stuff, and we said, God, if you ever want us to come back here, it was so friendly. They were so nice to us. We said, God, we're willing to serve here. Well, interestingly enough, he remembered that prayer, and 2.5 years later, we were called to go back to that church that had gone to about 10 people in size, and the pastor and his wife, wonderful folks, had served for 25 years there. She was a school teacher. She was retiring, and he was 70, and he was 65. And they moved to East Texas, and they were looking for somebody to come and pastor the church so they wouldn't have to go to be buried at First Baptist, and that was kind of the deal. So we had, so God called us back to the same town, so 6,000 Baptist churches in Texas, and we end up at Northside, and and know that God's going to call us into missions at some point, into the chaplaincy role. But it'd be that kind, but that would be the missions, would be the military chaplaincy, and so we said, God, we'll do this until you kick us out. But man, we thought we were trying to get out. I was trying to get out from the first tour because it was a hard environment in a way, and there was so many opportunities that came up. There was an opportunity to do missions with the IMB in Kenya. There was job openings. There was 3 associations in Illinois that wanted us to kind of be association missionaries because of our experiences in Kermit, and it was just a lot of things that were saying, is this where you want us to get out? So 30 years later, God let us out finally, at 34 years total, but of chaplaincy. So it was quite a good journey. But Marcia and I loved the military community, loved the service. It was our mission field the whole time. And subsequently, we got to go to 58 different countries around the world as a military chaplain, and on vacations and doing ministry with people and things, and the kids were able to get on all 7 continents. And so God just opened that global missions window enormously. And my doctorate is in transformational leadership for the global city. And how do you reach cities of over 1 million? And then here's our Air Force community that we, to try to, to connect into this global ministry world. So it was fun to get to be a part of that. So
okay, well, this is a good way to segue into the second thing, because you really teed it up well in terms of your initial sense of calling was to be a foreign missionary. The consideration of chaplaincy was not even low on the list, because you had some ideas or conceptions about that didn't fit into your sense of call.
Right.
Which leads me to the question that I've been wondering about for a long time, because having grown up, in a pastor's home, having been in churches, having been not necessarily in a military environment, although, you know, my dad served in areas that were close, and at one point in time, he served across the fence from Lackland Air Force Base, and so a lot of the guys I went to high school with were military brats. That our view, or my view, of military chaplaincy wasn't very high on the spiritual food chain, because our thinking was, and chaplaincy became a term to describe a caretaking ministry. And so for us, for those of us that felt a call to preach or a call to missions, that caretaking was not necessarily on the job description that we were looking for, that we're looking at advancing the kingdom, being able to present the gospel and reach people. And if you were a fan of MASH and you watched, you know, Francis Mulcahy on there, that he could change whatever hat for whoever he was trying to minister to accommodate their particular spiritual expectations. Was that similar to your own thinking about chaplaincy in advance of God's calling you to that?
I think the precision. I mean, the calling to be a foreign missionary and to go into cross cultures into another community was just a part of the path. You know, God's going to get us through. God's got to get us to there. He's got to get us through college. Got to get us through seminary. Get through me college and seminary. And then the specific area of call. Marcia had studied Spanish some. I was thinking, okay, we're going to go to Latin America, that sort of thing. So that was really hardwired, embedded into us, was this idea of foreign missions. And so military was first culture. Okay. So it wasn't cross-cultural. Right. That was going back to, that was sounds of home. Yeah. And so every time there was that kind of, my dad would say, hey, you want to be a chaplain, whatever. I said, Dad, I don't want to do this. I want to be in the military. I want to go across. My calling is to something different than that. So to go back into first culture was probably very valuable, because it was known to us, and that the kids would grow up in that was the culture they would grow up in. It was the culture that I grew up in, was the military culture. So it wasn't for me, the call there was this is what I thought God wanted us to do, and this is what we were fully committed to, which then prepared us to be a lot better chaplain and ministry as a team, my wife and I, than we would have been otherwise, because the things we learned doing foreign missions, cross-cultural stuff, church planning, all of the skills that came from getting ready to be a cross-cultural foreign missionary. Now we're in the middle of a military culture, which is a very exact representation of the American population. Yeah. And so what faith people have and what not, and the need to be able to have, the desire to be able to have someone to help them journey in their faith lane to walk with the Lord. It was our commitment to the Constitution that we would not hinder the free exercise of religion. Yeah. That the government wouldn't do that. They wouldn't prevent it. And so that access point on the First Amendment it allows us to be able to help people in their faith. Mm-hmm. But if I'm and where the disconnect is, and in my experience, most places where faith is practiced outside of a congregation, or a university or thing like this that does it, most of those settings have some cultural expectations of how you deal with faith and how that's handled and not. And so, but even people who are serving in places in the world where the presentation of the gospel and the way it's done is delicately handled and managed, so that they can work underground, they can be there as for whatever their reasons are, and they can serve in the national populace to help people come to faith, help churches to begin, even if they're underground congregations and in difficult places. And so, for example, we were 4.5 years in the Middle East, Marcia and I, and the tours that I had to do and things. So what you could share about being a Christian with Christians was fine. You could have that sharing with the Muslims, but if you tried to convert them, then that person, the government of that organization of that community would look poorly on that, and the military would then probably send that person home. Yeah. because
Right.
because of that setting. Now there may be other settings in other places where the communities have welcomed faith integration and et cetera. And so that's the, and I call it a little bit of the dance. Okay, what we're going to need to further the gospel. We're going to need to share our faith. We need to be able to do that with authenticity within the faith community that we come from. So if I've got a rabbi doing a Passover service, then that rabbi needs to be authentic for the Jewish people who are going to participate, or the others that they invite to have that experience. So that person has to be credentialed and ready to be practiced and ready to go so that they can take care of that faithfully. In the same way, an evangelical chaplain has to deliver the goods of what is this? This needs to look like home. The Roman Catholic service, if the Pope was to show up, needs to say, this is what I want. You guys did it right. So the same needs to be true for the Baptist guy, the evangelical person. They're sharing their faith. They're leading people to the Lord. They're baptizing folks. And that is that's great. We have baptized about over 500 people, 150 at the little church in Kermit. But after that, 350 more that were military folks while we were on the journey on the way. We got to lead them to the Lord, many more to the Lord, but then we got baptized that many, and so that was not only was it encouraged, it was celebrated as in the faith communities and the congregations. In fact, Marcia and I got to meet the President of the United States because of what was happening in Okinawa, Japan was so dynamic in the translation of faith in the lives of the military members. It was so dynamic that we were picked out of 3 couples to get to go meet, out of 7,000 people, we were picked to get to go meet the President because of how God was blessing and doing something. It was all his work, but somehow we got to pick to do it. And it was just really interesting. So I guess what back into that was, you know, everyone is in a, needs to be able probably to push the faith lane more than they do because of the fear factor that's in organizations, societies, it's in the military, it's in everything else. When we really want to when we really want the suicide rate to lower, if we really want the suicide rate to lower, then we need to be able to open the aperture at Boeing and at businesses, in congregations, and the military, and the hospitals, and prison chaplaincies. We need to open the aperture of Jesus is the reason. Jesus is the solution for. If I'm a Christian person and I'm carrying the message of Christ, and I don't, not only do I not lead you to water, I don't give you the opportunity to drink, is because I'm afraid of crossing a line. And in our cultures, for clergy and laity, we need to open the window of conversations of faith and mentorship to be able to say, I need to be able to share all of my life with you, not in coercion, not in any sort of favoritism, but because I care about you, I want to tell you my story, and that needs to be made. The door needs to be kicked wide open where people can have those conversations, so long as it's not bothering people or disrupting their work, as long as it's value added. If I'm a mentor and I can only tell you what books I read to be able to know how to do change management or design a Gantt chart, okay, that's great. You can do those things, but is this going to help that person come to faith in eternity? And so I think we need to flip not only the chaplaincy but the laity, everybody, to be able to think of themselves as chaplains in their home, in their workplace, and in their churches, as that they're the church. I hear this all the time, and I can't stand it. It's somebody says this. Well, this is outside the walls of the church. Like, well, what do you mean the walls of the church? Because the church is not here. The church is out in the school and at work, and they're down the street, and you go home, and the church is. This isn't the wall of the church. It's the people. So if there's a philosophical wall, if there's a barrier wall, that may be different, but it's not the physical walls. This is a church building. It's a church meeting area. We would say that's a chapel. That's probably a good name for it. This is a chapel. This is where we come hang out and do practice faith and have a sacred space. It's really cool. But we need to, as a people group, as a laity, all the church needs to see itself as belonging and connected to its community. And so when you're at the grocery store, when you're at your school, when you're whatever your situation, you're at work, you ought to be thinking about, how can I minister and care for people around me? How do I care for them and share with them and open that relationship in authentic love and care that you will become, everybody will become, in a way, pastors. Everybody is required to shepherd and pastor the flock. We have a book called 50 Steps with Jesus, Learning to Walk Daily with the Lord for New Discipleship. And in that book we wrote, we have a Spanish edition that's just coming out this month. And on the Spanish edition, I was talking to the guy who's head of the Hispanic Convention in Texas Baptist, and then the lady who's in charge of the Baptist Publishing House. And I said, so we have a shepherd's guide and a believer's guide. And they said, well, you can't call it a shepherd's guide. And I said, why can't you call it a shepherd's guide? And they said, well, because in Spanish, the shepherd and pastor are the same term. Right. And no one will do it. The laity won't be up, and they'll think it's the pastor's role. Right. And I said, oh, I didn't even think about that. But really, everybody needs to have ministry skills. Everybody needs to to increase their ability to love others, to care for others, to reach others, to do evangelism, to do discipleship as normal things. Yeah. Really, I'm sorry, I've talked way too long.
No, that's evidently we've struck on a sweet spot with your sense of call and purpose, and we wouldn't deny you that opportunity. But my mind is racing with a couple of issues, and one has to do with, there seems to be two distinctive environments of ministry for the chaplaincy, inside and outside, and that your sense of call was a confluence of the two. That for those of us who the concept of chaplaincy was simply caregiving, that was more of the inside mentality. So how did you manage that sense of call, since you had pastored, you knew what it was to stand and to preach, to share the gospel, to offer an invitation, to baptize people, to disciple people, to take all those sense of calling and practice and functions into the military environment, in doing chapel there, how much of that transferred into that environment where you were essentially doing the same thing just in that context, as opposed to seeing the military as a vehicle to take you places that you would never have been before for the purpose of doing foreign missions, to go into cultures that you would encounter, to be, and then when you were able to, in those cultural contexts, to share the gospel and have people respond, then how did you connect with the local church? Because they weren't going to become a part of the military establishment. They needed to become a part of a local fellowship for discipleship and growth. So how did you manage all of those various streams?
Actually, all of them really a lot more easily than you think. First of all, our transfer of a local congregation to an Air Force setting was almost exact. It was, it was going in. There was a few weird things that happened that they said, hey, we want you to take the liturgical service over. And I go, liturgical service? What's a liturgical service anyway? But then that led to being in charge of the main service, and it led to doing multiple congregations, and it led to. So a lot of positive things came out of that, but it was Sunday school, it was youth group, it was singles group, it was life groups, it was the women's ministry, men's ministries. All of it was very much the same as the local congregation was, and it was very exciting. People that loved the Lord, authentic believers, coming to the chapel community and with a desire to love the community that they're in, to pray for it, to be a part of it, to have. So if I could have one thing perfectly in this world that we haven't done as well, is I would love to see the military communities value that inside the wire community and invest in it as if it was gold, as if it was the most precious thing. That if we can have people inside the gate who are choosing to minister to the folks, because there's usually in most of our places, there's 800 to 2,000 folks that are under 22, 23 years old, living in dorms and needing the Lord and needing the relationships and needing that community, that faith community that Donnie was talking about, and the faith works concept of we can get folks to practice their faith with others. It's so transformational for the Lord. So for me, the transition into so first of all, first culture was military. So to transfer into that as a chaplain was difficult. It was hard to do because I was the 10th guy down. I've been the senior pastor of a one-person church, staff member church, congregation. I'm being a little silly, but but got there, and I had all these great ideas on things that we could do and should do, and then I was working sometimes for people of different religions and different faith groups and different desires and of what to do, and so I had to, my first few years were very, very, very difficult, and I picked up 19 couples I needed to do counseling for to do before they got married, and because there was a transition time, a lot of the chaplains had left, and I got I love getting to do that, but the load was heavy, and it continued to be heavy, and I just took everything on, didn't have the boundaries designed well. The first assignment, I was so excited to be there. We were excited to be there as a family, and it was, but it was not hard working with the congregations. It wasn't hard working with units. It was just me figuring out how I can operate and function in an environment where people have different priorities in their faith and the way it's practiced and how it will be practiced with me. And so that's part of, we teach it in the schools on what it means to work in an ecumenical or a multi-faith environment, the difference being multi-faith, different religions, so Muslim, Jewish, Orthodox, etc. Then interfaith would be within the Christian community. So itself. So I've said it wrong. It's interfaith is different religions,
right? And
ecumenical is Christian only.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
And so I was just figuring out how to do that. The point is the call. It goes back to the calling. God brought us here. Be wise, ask godly advice from people, if this is what you're supposed to do, do what you're supposed to do, help your boss be successful.
Yeah.
What can I do in my lane to help the person who's my supervisor be seen as, help them do their job well, and then earn the trust space to be able to say, I would like to do this service, or I'd like to host this service in my faith lane and things like that, and get their permission to do it if they need to.
So were there expected, or were there assumed, or were there stated parameters that when you're operating within an ecumenical environment of what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say, given the breadth of belief systems? Right.
You can. There's a lot more. There's a lot more freedom of religious expression for the chaplaincy than would be for the regular line folks. Okay. Because so a lot of that, we carry the water of the faith opportunities for people. And so what's hard to do for some people is, well, I'm not going to allow there to be, I'm going to deploy, and we're going to have somebody of a group that I don't like or don't agree with, and so I'm not going to help them have their faith expression. And so the chaplaincy, and it's not a compromise because God's making it. We're not compromising faith. We're not compromising our beliefs. What we have to do is we provide for those who we can't serve immediately, directly. I can't do a Catholic Mass.
Right.
I could preach. I could do a sermon in one.
Yeah.
The priest could let me do the sermon, but I'm not going to be able to do communion for them. But I can set it up where they can have that, the priest come in.
Yeah.
I can build that environment for them where there's a priest on our team that will take care of the Catholic community.
Okay.
If there's somebody who really, really loves a liturgical service, like a Lutheran or Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Methodist, they really want to have communion every week. They want to have a more formal ritual service. I want to have a chaplain that can come and carry that that sphere.
Okay.
If I'm going to have I want an evangelical chaplain, and to be able to cover. So if I've got an evangelical, a liturgical, and a Roman Catholic on the team, those three, then 95% of people's religious concerns will be, there'll be somebody who's covering that relatively as best we can.
Yeah.
And sometimes we circuit ride. We'll go to the sites and stuff like that. We'll send them chaplains out, and they'll ride helicopters to forward operating bases and do worship services, and the priest will do the same thing, and the Protestants will do the same thing. And so we do that so that they can have their faith expression. They can have their if they don't have the chaplains stationed where they are, then we can send those chaplains. Like we would send chaplains to Saudi Arabia. We would send them to Jordan and to and we would go down to different places to visit our chaplains throughout the Middle East. And so we have chaplains scattered at all the military bases the best we possibly can.
So how intentional were you? You said you went to 58 different places serving. That in those environments, certainly in a Muslim world, you wouldn't have local Baptist churches or Christian churches that you would be aware of. But in most places where that was an option, how intentional were you with trying to connect with those local fellowships to have a symbiotic relationship?
Sure. Absolutely is setting. For example, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all of them allow, in Oman, all of them allow a Christian program and services, Roman Catholic, Protestant, in other churches like from India and places like that. They allow them to meet. They have space aside for them.
Okay.
And it's authorized by the governments to meet in those locations. And so I was in several situations able to go to downtown churches, got permission from the leadership to have our chaplains of like faith and kind. So an imam could go down to a mosque. So a Protestant could go down to Church City and be a part of a worship services. So it happens in countries that are working with expatriate communities that know why religion's important, and these folks are going to be here, we need to take care of them. And so the military dance in that is based upon that setting. So for example, in Afghanistan, I could do worship services on all the military bases and did participate in them, and was in the green zone and things like that. We had chaplains and got to go there and do that. There sometimes the country, but for me, I wouldn't be able to travel to the villages to go meet people of different faiths and talk with them or engage, because it wasn't the Air Force role.
Yeah,
it was an Army role.
Right.
To do to engagement, to engage, to community engagement. So the chaplains are trained there. To how would you meet with a mufti, or a mufti, or would you meet with different people? So that was there's a training in that, but the possibility of that is it begins to open doors of relationship and trust. And most Muslim people are very interested in talking to people about religious stuff, to us about it. We closed down because we don't want to be considered in the outreach very, very delicate in it, because we don't want to be seen to be proselyting in any way. In that particular use of that term, but the Muslims that I got to meet in dialogues and things were very, very interested in talking about religion, and I was able to talk about religion and faith and them and their journey, and they loved it because it's the most important thing to them. Yeah, and some Americans, it's the most important thing.
All right, so what year did you actually enter active duty?
1991.
1991. So that would have been not at the beginning, but early on in what has taken place in American churches, evangelical churches, between traditionalism and non-traditional expressions of worship. Right. Wars have been fought over the music and all those kind of things, and all that was when you were going in. Did you see a connection between those conflicts that were existing in local churches in America outside of the military establishments and what you were attempting to do as a pastor to the people in the military of that base? Was there a connection, or was it a total disconnect?
Well, I think I hope I heard the question correctly. When you're overseas in a military base and you're choosing to go on a chapel, you're going to, some places there's no choice. Right. This is it. You got it. And we were trying to even connect embassies so that people that worked on embassy staffs around the world could have worship services that were being broadcast out of Europe into Africa and stuff like that. So we were working on things called faith zones, is what we called it. But because it was so important, because they didn't have that opportunity. Because they were on they were Christians, godly Christians, and so about this time, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the ability to have live worship practice in your house, in your home on the television screen, became an option for some people.
Right.
It wasn't the same as meeting in faith community with other people, which we would have highly encouraged folks to do. And so when you're coming to a military base, most of the time, the military culture is going to be thankful for, authentic Bible preaching and pastor, and in the music isn't going to be, the very few people are not going to go to a worship service because they have a drum.
Oh, okay.
Elders are 40 years old.
Yeah.
In a military. So, in a congregation. I had elders at a service in Okinawa. We had 7 elders that were all ordained at some level, and so I had a different groups. But anyway, they were old people. They were like 40 years old and stuff like that. So that's a different. It doesn't have now the retirees that Donnie was talking about, folks that this is their faith community lifetime, born into it. For those folks, there is a music. The compromise. The music is. It does matter to them, and people have left. Because now we're doing contemporary, and we're not doing a blended or a
right.
So, and we add a strange extra dynamic to this, which is gospel. Because the gospel service is, if I say, hey, we're going to do this, we have a what would be like a formal First Baptist United Methodist service that's going to follow this. We're going to do hymns, and we're going to do it this way. Then we're going to have a contemporary service that meets sometime during the week. And then we have a gospel service, which is usually in the afternoon, so that they can have as much time as they want to do a 2 or 3 hour service if they would like.
Now, you need to qualify gospel service for our listeners.
Okay. So gospel service in the military culture is the African American expression of faith.
Right.
And so it comes from that background.
For the Dondies of the world that gospel music for them means quartet music.
Yes, well said, yeah.
We need to clarify that.
Right, so gospel is using African American style of service. Now it can be Baptist. It can be Episcopal. It can be Methodist. But it can be a shared. It's a shared experience. And the same way, really, the Protestant community, for the most part, is going to be we wanting to reach the young folks. And so the music styles and things that we do would be similar to what a university would do. I went to Campus Crusade, had a meeting with their leadership, and I said, we want to make worship irresistible to our 18-year-olds that are coming in. How do we do that? And so we began to think through means and ways of what gets people. How do we help people practice their faith? Religiosity is the term that FaithWorks was based out of. Yeah. Religiosity is practicing your faith with others in community. So I have a faith, but I may not be practicing it with others. I have a community, and it may not be faith-based. So they're not. So it's the two combined. It's the community. It's practicing your faith with other people that creates religiosity, which has all these dynamics that he was talking about in FaithWorks, and so that is the huge difference that it's going to make in people's lives. If you practice your faith with other people, then it's going to be transformational to you, and it's going to be transformational to them. If you really got it, if churches would really get this, you'd be dragging your high school friends to congregation with you. And the churches need to be authentic, and they need to deliver the goods on what the Holy Spirit is doing, what God is doing through them, to be able to lead that congregation, to love Him and to know Him, to journey with Him, to have a walk with Him.
Yeah. All right. One more question before we shift gears to the last segment. That is, in my conversation with Don Day, his experience going in the military, because he went in. Now he was working on laser-guided bombs when he felt called to the chaplaincy, and when he talked about when he began that chaplaincy thing, because he had that cross on his uniform, that precluded a lot of issues that otherwise. Yep. How different was your experience in the service because you were intentional on the track of chaplaincy, and the normal person who goes in as a young man or a young woman at 17 or 18 or 19 years of age, and they're leaving home and they're going into this world that's not decidedly spiritually bent, that that challenges their faith and leads. It's like my older brother, who his lottery number was 36 back in 1972, and so rather than going to the Army, he went to the Air Force and never left Texas. But it was his first exposure to drinking alcohol. It was his first exposure to experimenting with drugs, and it took him on a journey away from his faith foundation because it was so prevalent in terms of his interaction there. So how different was your experience, because you were engineering, you were directing toward this ministry, and the average service person who goes in just to serve their country or to serve their time or do whatever?
Right. So, are you asking a demographics kind of questions with the second part of that, which is their time in service, or is just their experience in service?
More their experience in service and your perception or your take on that, because it is, by and large, the military is not a spiritual enterprise. Would that be safe to say?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I would say the opposite is true.
Okay.
I would say that that there is that spiritual things are vitally important to commanders, to families, to leaders, to people of faith.
Okay.
And is very important to them.
Okay.
And having quality, authentic faith and authentic ministers, developing that faith, or lay ministers or people, is important to them. So there are a large section of the military community, people come in as conservative people, great citizens, and so the faith exchange that takes place has that has been the dance. Is how do we share this and talk about this in such a way that is okay. So when the LD Mormon guy comes into to the community, he's going to be looking right away. He or she are going to be looking right away to find out where's the ward at. They'll probably already know. They probably have already called ahead. But if they're going to a place like it's a deployed setting, bear-based buildup, then they're going to want somebody they want to have their service with authentic Mormon people. The evangelicals are going to want their evangelical deal. The liturgicals want the liturgical. The Catholics are going to want the Catholic. So they're going to want those things, and and they value them, and they're very important to them. And Marcia had a Bible study we were doing on Qatar. And there were these people who were doing the war against ISIS, and they were doing the planning and they'd come on Sundays. They would take Sundays off to be able to come and worship and spend time with God and connect, and then go to Bible study, and then be able to do the rest of the week. So having that congregation in the midst, and that Bible study opportunity, and that worship service opportunity. So here are the people that are literally saying, "Here's the bomb load for tomorrow. Here's where we're shooting. Here's where all the bombers are. Here's where everybody around the Middle East is going to come together and do tomorrow's work, and all these different countries, and for faith to be in there." I had one of the commanders. He said, "I drive by the chapel every day, and God gives me the strength just by turning my heart to that for just a moment to get me through it." And in one situation, they had there was something that happened that was horrific in a bombing run, and a general officer came in, and he said he was been part of that, and he came in, and he just needed to spend 15 to 20 minutes by himself in a place in the chapel where he could connect with God and deal with what had happened, and maybe asking for forgiveness, and it was the only time he did it in a year. But that he said, "I know you're here, I know, and I'll come." And so I would think the spiritual people, 80%, 70, 80% have some identifier on there, and whether then that's not accurate at all, because some people, my parents were Catholic, so I guess I'm Catholic, even though I've never been. And then some are like, well, I'm not any of these denominations that you say I'm in, and so it balances out probably. But about 80% start with a faith identifier of some kind, and 20% maybe spiritual. They don't know what that means. So it's only a fraction of people who identify themselves as atheist or as agnostics. Very small fraction of people identify that way.
Did you see any discernible difference between the ministry opportunities and openness in the bases that were outside of the continental United States, where people were in a foreign country, in a foreign culture, in in a war zone and what you saw
Sure.
resident here.
Well, and people always say, people always automatically say that overseas is different, and I disagree.
Okay.
Because most places we're at overseas, they have off-base churches in some ways. But authentic community, when it's built stateside, it has a chaplaincy tied into it when they go overseas. Or when they go overseas and have a great chaplaincy experience, they come back, they may say, hey, I want to invest in this. And it really is the quality and the intentionality of the chaplaincy which needs to be valued at a level where we are, we're not the last resort. When people go to places that somebody said, well, is God calling me to minister as a missionary in this environment with my family, military family, or do I want to escape and get away from the people who, and go out and have, church community with people? And I think they're valid both ways. But I think the in the current setting, the military communities would, when we're overseas, when we're deployed, we really need to do a good job as chaplains in having high quality, authentic ministry for people in those settings, because that's the constitutional reason we exist. It's when people are sent away from their homes, that wherever they may go, that we're going to have people for them to take care of them.
Yeah.
So the Catholic guy coming out of the Northwest who comes down to the deep South and gets at a small town, a military base, and they don't have a Catholic community or don't speak Spanish, that chaplain needs to be thinking about how can I help take care of them and help them in this, and it may be a conversation with the priest to go, hey, can we do a
Yeah. And so you serve how many years?
34 total,
34
five reserve,
Okay.
While pastoring and finishing seminary, not that order, finishing seminary, and then 31 years, then 34 total, 29 active duty.
Okay. And you retired as a brigadier general?
Yes.
Okay. At what point in that journey did you meet Dondi?
I met Dondi. I was bailing him out of jail when he was. No, I'm just playing. I met him at first. We were at a conference. I'd heard about him a lot. I met him, but he was at the schoolhouse. We have a training school, and we were putting together the possibility of how would we create a common curriculum for spiritual development of our population. And Donnie was put in charge of that task force, and I was brought in as one of the people to help think through how would we do this. And so it was a week-long program that the chaplain who brought him on, he's the guy that wanted it for the military people, and the next chief of chaplains didn't. So I didn't ever go anywhere. But that's where I met him, and then we met, and then he was. When we were in Germany, he was a lieutenant colonel working in a base called Spangdahlem, about an hour from Ramstein, where I was at the headquarters. And so I was the colonel. I was the deputy for the Europe and Africa ministries that we had. And so we had, so he was part of the wing chaplains, and so we got to meet them there, and then got to see them as he became a colonel very quickly, and went to the Middle East, and then went to for a year. He was in the Middle East for a year. And I was 2 years after him. Yeah. Okay. So in the Middle East. And then Marcia and I were together for the first time that was allowed couples to go. And so we did that. And so they ended up in Hawaii. And he just thought he was going to be out. We all thought he was going to be out. But Marcia prayed and said, God, let him get to be miraculously make it where he's the 1-star.
Yeah.
And he became the 2-star.
Yeah. Great part of his story.
That's wonderful.
All the improbable.
But it is the story. It is the story of the miraculous for everybody.
Sure.
If God's going to bring you and call you, He's going to equip you, He's going to help you. But you got that calling, that sense of calling, it's got to be so important to keep you in the game, because the storms come all the time. Right. So you got to be walking with the Lord, loving the Lord, having that relationship with Him, and saying, okay, God, you asked us to do this, so here we go.
And what year did you retire?
2020.
2020. And how long between when you retired and when Dondi reached out to you about coming here?
Well, that was in April of 20.
Okay.
And we had been applying with the IMB and with other.
You're answering the question about what was your plans at that point.
We were trying to figure out, did we want to go, are we going to do the God's Greater Grace Ministries, are we going to do that full time, move to Texas, are we going to do this, or are we going to do, there was several missions organizations which had openings at them, in which we thought, okay, let's see about this. There was a church who was thinking, let us be a missions director for them, or a pastor at a church. And so we were looking at those things, trying to see what God wanted us to do. And Marcia and I were on this. We had just finished like a 6-mile walk on the base, and it's COVID time. Everybody's doing COVID, and we got a call at the end of exactly when we got to the end of the walkway, which he would have run 100 times, hundreds of times when he was there for 3 years, that same walkway. So at that path, at that spot where we turned to go into our neighborhood, which he was in, 2 doors down from where we were historically before. So when he left, so we came. So when he came, it was April, and he called and he says, "Is this something you guys would be interested? Are you tired of the chaplaincy?" Really was the question he asked. And we said, "Well, it's our people group." And I thought what he was wanting me to do was there was some college of Unity that needed a chaplain to work it. And so I really thought that was what the job was going to be. And then he described the Dewey Center, which is the Dewey Center for Chaplaincy, which is Rob and Kathy Dewey put together a $2 million endowment in the Dewey Center to help us to it's for chaplaincy. It's the Dewey Center for Chaplaincy. So ours is development and skills, like in the 2 Peter chapter 1, where people can increase their ministry skills. So laity up to full-time, people have been 30 years as a hospital chaplain. In that range, we want to increase ministry skills so people know how to care for one another at a higher level. And then we're one of 2 universities in the United States that has an undergraduate degree in chaplaincy ministry, and Wayland's the other in Plano, Texas. Not Plano, but oh gosh, I just went brain dead. But anyway, it's east of Lubbock.
Okay.
And so so when he called and we came out, we started the center. We have this degree in undergraduate school that we're working on a master's now in chaplaincy counseling. And so our goal is to hopefully to get into schools and organizations, churches, to be able to go and teach folks how to be aware of suicide and considerations of mental health concerns for people. How do you help somebody in a time of need? People are always curious, what do I say? What do I do when? What do I do when the pastor calls and says, "Hey, the sheriff needs you to go to someone's house to give some bad news," and to be able to, how do you know how to go through that with the Lord, the Holy Spirit, and go, and what are some scriptures you can use? How do you think when you go in those cultures and those environments? And so we want to train people in crisis ministry skills, and it's not just a military track at all. It really is much, much broader than the military track, because we have federal, state, local prison systems, correctional programs. There are things for the hospitals and for hospice, in that it's its own lane. There's first responders, the fire dogs, the EMS, and the cops. All of those guys are their own kind of deal that they do. Then there's other federal types of chaplaincies, like the Secret Service and the FBI. They all have like volunteer chaplaincies that they develop and they grow. Sports chaplaincy is a big deal. It's huge in coaching world, and how do you care for people and do chaplaincy. The university chaplaincy is a huge deal, and as we see evidenced here, it's a tremendous to see how God can change the lives of people in this culture and that we're in now. It's a lot of fun that we're getting to see God do a lot of cool stuff with our students. And so we've started the program. We've had 8 majors in the chaplaincy now. We've got 7 on track, 1 graduated, and they're loving this, getting to learn to do this, to go places and see stuff. And so we take them on to go to the site. So let's go to the military community. We go to the base. Let's go downtown. We'll talk to Rob Dewey and talk about how he kept 200 people from jumping off bridges, working with the police department. Let's go. We'll go to the prisons. We'll go to the places and see them so that we can help increase their ministry skills so that they can be better at it. And then we want to do training, and so for that as well.
So how similar or dissimilar would the training for chaplaincy through the Dewey Center be different from somebody who's planning on going into pastoral ministry in a local church?
Okay. The huge value thing is we are doing what most people get after they graduate from seminary and they start working in a local church. So we're doing the how-to skills that person needs to be training their entire congregation on how to do.
Yes.
And so these are very transformational. They're regular ministry skills. And when you're out in the community, if you're thinking about that person's not being themselves today, wonder what's wrong. I'll ask. Because they've been taught, hey, that's what you want to do. You want to say, hey, what's going on? You know, you're not being yourself today. And then that can go to a follow-on question, and then they have the infrastructure already set up for if a person has a crisis, who could they go to? In the school counselor, to their pastors, to their to the it could be you know, somebody that's a chaplain that's at the hospital or whatever it is, but they know that somebody in their church has already got, okay, here's the people I can talk to. My pastor's trained in what to do. So I'm going to go talk to them. Hey, so-and-so's not acting themselves. What should I say or do? And then you talk to them and say, are you being suicidal? Well, no, but I'm having a terrible time with something. And it opened the door for caring for one another at a different level. And one of the things that I really would advocate for congregations to do is to not see their church members who are chaplains formally or informally be seen as outside the congregation. Right. Because they're in organizations that are claiming them as their chaplain. So, hey, pastor, you're right, community chaplain, and so you're going to be take care of our police department and fire department, and you're going to or you're going to work the clinic, and you're going to be our chaplain for that. So they become chaplains by being part of that organization, being a religious person, a holy person. The visual reminder of there's a phrase called ministry of presence, which is misused tremendously in the chaplaincy, because most people say it's my presence with you is ministry, being with you in the hospital room, being with you in a crisis time, being with you when you've got a death notification. I'm being with you, and this is ministry of presence. But we're clergy. We're not ordained social workers. We're ordained ministers. So it's the ministry of the presence of God in us.
Right.
That's the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence is the Lord within us, ministering to them in the Holy Spirit.
That was what they were teaching at Southwestern when I was there, that it's the practice of the presence of God.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. That is exactly right. And that's something that we're hoping to do for chaplaincy, for the chaplaincy world, to be able to have that kind of sense of essence to it, to be able to say, this is part of a congregation that's praying, that's reaching out, that's doing. This is part of that. So and when they're going and doing it, it's they're representing the Lord, but they're also representing their congregation.
Right. Well, evidently, you could talk much longer about this that you're passionate about, that's close to your heart, and this is what God has called you to in this season of your life. So now's an opportunity for you to do shameless self-promotion of the university and of this ministry. So I want you to look at this camera here, face on, and say anything to encourage anybody who's considering chaplaincy or ministry, why they should come here, and how glad you'd be to accommodate them to make that happen.
That's very good. How much time do I get for this?
That's okay. We're watching the clock. If we need to really end, take just a few minutes.
Okay, we'll do. All right, so one of the things, hopefully, as you've been looking at this, that's vitally important is clarity of call. And God is able to tell you at your level of understanding what he's calling you to do and leading you to do. He's going to probably spend some time with it more than you want because he likes you to spend time with him praying and seeking and searching his will. And you want to have that crystallized. He may not give you anything but the next step. But when you do that, see that as a holy thing, that God is moving you, the Holy Spirit is leading you in this way. That Jesus inside of you is wanting to be yoked with you and for you guys to journey on that calling, whatever it is. God may want you to not be in any formal type of chaplaincy, but he is calling you to be a pastor, a caregiver, for your congregation, for your families, for your friends, to be someone who's engaging their lives, not in the formal role necessarily of pastor with those particular giftings, but all of us learn from the pastors how to pastor other people, and that's what equipping until we all reach the same level is about. Is when we're using our gifts to help other people become more like Christ, more like Jesus, and so this is part of that. And so see yourself as having that desire to be able to help other people, no matter whether you're formally in a chaplaincy role or you're caring for people like a chaplain would, which is caring for people that are within your congregation and those that are in your community that you can care for. So as you're thinking about that, and the shameless plug for us, there's several great things that have happened to us at CSU that we want to tell you about. We want you to share this with your grandchildren, your children, your parents, or whoever. There's several things that are happening that are just super dynamic that are not happening anywhere else. If you go to the Student Leadership University in Florida, it meets in Florida. It's Jay Strack is the guy who runs this. If you go to that 1 week long conference as a high school kid, then you can get $2,000 a year off of your tuition each year you're here at Charleston Southern University. So it's worth $8,000 if you go to this 1 week conference. And it doesn't matter what your major is. You're all going to be doing ministry and caring for others and building people up. And so you're building one another up. And so it doesn't matter what your particular major is, particular minor is, but we care that you're doing ministry and you're learning and you're growing. And that J-Strack time, it's a good time. It's a really good time, opportunity to be a part of that. Look at that, because that's actually a 4-year deal. If you wanted to start off your 8th graders with that, you can. So that's no, it's the 9th graders. So start off with 9th graders with 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. All right, yeah, so it's 4 years of a program. It's great to do. One of the things that we just had in the Dewey Center for Chaplaincy is we just had a scholarship for helping people that want to be part of the chaplaincy program to be able to do that and to pay for that. Has been funded by a retired Navy chaplain, and he and his wife are donating money to help us have scholarships for people to be able to be a part of the chaplaincy program here. Another thing that we're doing that is just off the charts, in our College of Christian Studies department, there's a regular College of Christian Studies core, and you can look online at MyCSU and go to this to find it. And also, you can go to churchandgospel.com to find our upcoming conferences that we're doing. We've got a big one coming up in April, where we're talking about faith works and how this works and how it applies. Dr. Costin is speaking at this, and we've got some other guest speakers that are great to be able to talk about why it's important to help other people in their faith. But the big thing that's come out of this is all 6 of the Southern Baptist universities, and now others have started joining as well, are going to get 1 full year off of their Master's of Divinity degree if you finish your degree here. Or even get part through some of your degree, you can transfer that into seminary. So here's this unheard of deal where a university has 4 different seminaries that are saying, hey, listen, we'll give you up to 30 hours off of your Master of Divinity degree, which takes a full year off of that training, because the value of the quality of the professors that are here at CSU and how godly these guys are, and they're men and women and some ladies teaching programs as well here for women in family life programs. There's just a great cadre of folks that love the Lord and want to serve, and they've chosen to serve at CSU, and would love to have you come be a part of this. One last thing on the scholarship deal, unbelievable, but except for God is. If you come in now this summer, if you were to join this summer coming up, you would get and join the College of Christian Studies. It's only for majors in this program. You will get $17,500 off of your tuition to be a part of and become part of the College of Christian Studies majors, and that's $17,500 every year. So equivalent of about $70,000 of income of money for you over the course of your time. And it's just brand new scholarship that's been offered by our sessions people to encourage people to come and to be here. Now, one of the things that so this is a great opportunity, and you can apply with it at CSU to come in. You have to be an incoming freshman to be able to get the scholarship at this point. And so it's brand new. It's an opportunity for recruiting and to tell folks about it. If you want to come here, we're also very excited about the fact that we're only 40 minutes drive from the beaches, and we're really jazzed about that our weather is better than other places, and the Lord, you need to go where God wants you to go, and you need to be in His will 100%. If God is calling you to be here with us and to walk the journey with us, we would love to do that. And if you want to be in the College of Christian Studies major or minor, it is a marvelous ride. And so you can find more about that. So just go to My CSU and type in the Dewey Center. It'll pop up. There'll be two sections to that, one describing the center itself, the things that we've been talking about, and another one about what the degree is like. And so you'll have fun looking at those things. We're excited about what God is doing here. My wife and I invite you to come to our house when you come, even if it's just to visit the school, to let us know. And we live out at a place close to Cypress Gardens, and usually there's 100 to 130 college students a week come to our house to have Bible study and learn. So that's a Sunday afternoon, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night program. And we're just really thankful they come out, drive to our home, and we get to spend time helping to shape you and walk with you and journey with you and the Lord Jesus and teach you the Word of God. And so lots happening, lots of exciting things are taking place, and we would love for you to be a part of the CSU family and the community. God bless you. Thanks, James, for doing this. This was really a class deal. Thanks, Brian, for working helping us to do this here at CSU. And just want everybody to know that this is an honor to get to be able to be a part, to have James get to talk with us and me about this journey with the Lord that we've been able to be on. Very excited about helping you on your journey if God calls you to that here. God bless you. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for the privilege. This is awesome. For those of you who are logging in and watching this, you've been a part of supporting this ministry, that you can reach out to me if you would like to make a connection with Ron, and to hear more from him, to hear more about the college, you can contact me at this email address. For those of you who support our ministry financially to make it possible for us to do what we're doing, contact me about how you can do that electronically, or if you're old school and want to just drop a check in the mail, you can do it to this address. Church Rebirth Ministries is a 501c3, so you will get acknowledgement for that contribution to take off your taxes. So thank you for being a part of this. Look forward to next time. And Brian, I guess that's a wrap.